Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Melanie Zanona, and if it's Wednesday, we have election results. Progressives notching another big win in last night's Colorado primaries, part of a wave of Democratic Socialists winning in deep blue pockets of the country, as Democrats grapple with the direction of their party and their base heading into the midterms. Democratic Socialist Melat Quiros defeating incumbent Congresswoman Diana DeGette, who's represented Colorado's 1st District for more than 3 decades. Quiros' message leaning on issues that have animated the progressive base, including immigration and Israel. Speaking to supporters last night, Quiros celebrating her victory as proof of a larger shift brewing inside her party.
We will not wait to take the fight to Donald Trump and the oligarchy. We will not wait. We will not wait to abolish ICE and pass Medicare for all. We will not wait to put an end to the politics of the past, to get big money out of our politics, and to reject corporate PACs and APAC. And no, we will not wait to end the genocide in Palestine. We are winning from coast to coast, from every level of office. We are taking back our party and our country.
But while the insurgent progressive message resonated in deep blue Denver, it didn't resonate enough in the Democratic Senate primary, where incumbent Senator John Hickenlooper fended off a surprisingly tough challenge from State Senator Julie Gonzalez, despite massively outraising and outspending her in the campaign. In his victory speech last night, Senator Hickenlooper trying to refocus on uniting his party.
Let me tell everybody that Democrats are united. Democrats are united. We're going to take back the U.S. Senate. We're going to take back the House. We're going to take back the House, and then we're going to stop President Trump in his tracks.
And in another warning sign for establishment Democrats, Colorado Senator and former presidential candidate Michael Bennet lost his primary bid for governor, despite being the early juggernaut. He was defeated by State Attorney General Phil Weiser, who pitched himself to voters as the feistier candidate to take on Donald Trump.
And Colorado, in the face of a lawless, bullying Trump administration, trying to intimidate us, rip away our rights and freedoms, you made it clear that we need a leader who will fight back and never bend the knee.
President Trump and Republicans, meanwhile, are signaling they are eager to focus on the insurgent left wing of the Democratic Party in the upcoming midterms, with President Trump moments ago renewing his attacks on Democratic Socialists as, quote, communists, as he spoke in North Dakota in the opening of the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library. Joining me now from Capitol Hill, actually on set with me, is senior national political reporter Sahil Kapur and Kyle Clark, anchor and political reporter for our Denver affiliate KUSA. I'm going to start with Sahil, who is on set with us because Congress is actually not in session as they were supposed to be. But I want to start with these results last night. I know Capitol Hill is gone, but what kind of reaction are you getting from Capitol Hill and from Congress about these results last night?
It's a bad time to be a Democratic incumbent in Washington. I think that's the through line of all these races we saw in Colorado. We've seen this happen in New York and elsewhere around the country as well. I think Democratic leadership is still trying to process what this moment means. Is it a matter of ideological divides or voters demanding that Democrats move to the left? Is it a generational matter? Is it throw the bums out? Is it all of the above? The generational contrast in the Melat Quiros race was remarkable because she was born in 1997 after Diana DeGette first won that seat. She's held that seat for longer than her opponent has been alive. So I think all of that kind of factors into how Democrats are trying to understand this moment and how Democratic leadership feels they need to respond.
Yeah, talk to me more about the Democratic leadership and specifically Hakeem Jeffries. How is he viewing this sort of shift within his own party?
I think he's probably happy that the House is out of session today because he gets to sit with this and process how he wants to respond to it. He did put up some congratulatory tweets congratulating Melat Quiros. Didn't have a whole lot to say about her beyond that, but said they're going to take back the majority. He also congratulated Manny Rutinel in Colorado's 8th district. That's going to be a big, important race. And he had, he talked about him as the right candidate to win that district.
I mentioned that Republicans and Trump are calling these candidates communists, but talk to me about how you think Republicans are really going to try to message this in the midterms.
I think part of it is the word socialist doesn't have the same sting as it once did, so President Trump is calling them communists. But yes, it's the same strategy that Republicans have used to varying degrees of success in many years. They're going to try to tie the Democrats to the leftmost wing of the party. And will they be more successful this time around because the left-wing insurgents are doing better here? That's an open question. It may be possible that works better, but we're also seeing it happen more in big cities and dark blue districts like Denver last night and Manhattan, New York City. We're not really seeing as much of it in the suburbs. Democratic Socialists are not winning primaries in these competitive purple districts where Democrats have to win. I did speak moments ago, or rather a few hours ago, to Steny Hoyer, the former House Majority Leader. He's disappointed, he said, in the result. He said Daggett was a good member of Congress, or rather is still a good member of Congress, and that she was unfairly tagged as not being enough of a fighter. He did warn that if Democrats get tagged writ large as socialists, they're not going to win nationally.
And Diana Daggett was an impeachment manager, so she has been someone fighting on the front lines here. We also saw Democrats make their pick in Colorado's 8th district. This is a key flip opportunity. Talk to me about that race and how confident are Democrats that they can flip that seat?
Very confident, in large part because of the environment. Gabe Evans is a first-term member. He won only by about 2,500 votes last time in what was a much better national environment than we are expecting in 2026. That's their main source of optimism. Democrats are going to run on the Medicaid cuts that Gabe Evans supported in President Trump's big, beautiful bill. They're going to highlight the cost of living and accuse Gabe Evans and President Trump of failing to make good on that promise. But Republicans also feel somewhat confident because Manny Rutinel does have a very progressive record that they're going to try to tag him as out of touch. They're going to try to tag him as too much of an extremist. And Republicans are very aware that a number of Democrats are on the record saying maybe he can't win a general election. They were arguing during the primary that his challenger, more moderate challenger, was a better candidate.
Definitely a race to watch. Sahil, Kapur, thank you. Kyle, I want to turn to you now. What were your takeaways from last night?
I think what I heard from Democratic voters, and I think what we saw in the results last night in Colorado, was not necessarily a referendum on the age of candidates or on incumbency, but about action and about whether they're being effective in delivering what Democratic primary voters say they want done as priorities. Because Diana Daggett was a very progressive member of Congress. She said all of the right things to Democratic voters, but was unable to show anything for it in terms of results. And that was the opening that Democratic Socialist Malat Quiros had to say, hey, listen, if nothing else, send me in with a different style and a different approach to hold out and force concessions from other Democrats, and maybe we can deliver on some of these priorities. And I think that infused a couple races in Colorado last night.
Something else that stood out to me is that both Hickenlooper and Quiros won by 10 points each on opposite ends, of course, of this Democratic divide. What does that tell us about where Colorado voters are right now?
I would urge people not to look at those two races together because they're wildly different situations, right? It's different electorates with different takeaways. Hickenlooper was running a statewide race with a more moderate population of voters. He also is the best known name in Colorado politics. He had an enormous war chest that fended off top tier challengers. He was ready for action. So while the critique stands against Hickenlooper from Democrats, you hear it a lot, that he has not been able to deliver on their key priorities. He fended off the top tier challengers, instead got a lesser known state senator who didn't have appeal outside Denver and wasn't able to fundraise. While in Denver, you have a much more liberal base of voters. Diana Daggett facing a lot of the same criticisms, much more progressive than John Hickenlooper. She got caught flat-footed. She was not ready for this challenge. She's never had a serious primary challenge. And the quality of the challenger. Malat Quiros, if Americans are just getting to see and hear her, she is a very effective messenger for her far-left views in the same way that New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani is. She is eloquent, she is thoughtful, and she's not confrontational. She tries to meet people where they are and say, I bet we agree on more than we disagree.
And then let's talk about the race for governor, because both Michael Bennet and Phil Weiser had pretty similar platforms. So how was Weiser more effectively able to harness the anti-establishment energy in the party?
I think it's because he painted Michael Bennet as a creature of Washington, and that's how Phil Weiser overcame a 25 to 30 point deficit in this race to eventually win by double digits. His message to folks in Colorado, Democratic primary voters who had supported both him for AG and Bennet for Senate in the past, was, listen, leave Michael Bennet where he is. He's doing an okay job in Washington. He could be a little bit tougher on Trump, but leave him there. Don't bring Washington here. All right. We don't want that style of problem solving here. I'm promising more fresh action, more direct confrontation with Donald Trump. And I think that was the edge for Weiser. And at the end of the day, it traps Michael Bennet in a job that, honestly, it appears that he hates. He wants out of Washington. He wants out of the Senate. But voters told him, don't quit your day job.
Really important insight and reporting. Kyle, thank you so much.
We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.